All right, cool. We're here with Lightning Pod with Sid Bendre of Oleve. I screwed it up. We practiced this. But welcome. Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Definitely a big fan of the podcast, so it's super exciting to be on it.
Awesome. I wanted to feature you because I think that you have an interesting story around doing a lot of shipping apps with a small team, but then also shipping multiple apps, right? Like you're not just like doing one startup, you're kind of a startup studio. Is that right? Maybe you could tell that story just on like, I think you went through Neo and Z Fellows as well. And like how did you find your way towards this startup studio concept?
Yeah, totally. Formerly, we were actually known as Quizard AI as a company. This is the namesake of the first product that we launched, the Quizard AI mobile app. But we launched this at the end of January in 2023, kind of a few months after ChatGPT was sort of launched. And we launched this with a TikTok that went viral overnight. It was kind of like a POV ChatGPT and Photomath had a baby. Got 1 million views overnight, and that converted to about 10,000 users in under 30 hours. And then we just started scaling it from there. A month later, we added a paywall in and basically started revenue generating, tried different business models at the time, kind of landed on weekly subscriptions initially as being a good subscription model, or just like subscriptions in general as being the best model. Played around with tokens and stuff like that. What was interesting actually to note is back then we had no LLM costs when we launched, because back then, Codex was actually a model that was live. If you remember, Codex had the beta preview, and it was completely free. And we figured out if you prompt engineered it, you could actually get it to do open domain, like language, like natural conversation about different subjects. And so we were cycling through about 10 different keys, using Codex to respond. And actually, when they were turning down or like shutting down or sunsetting Codex, we got an email saying we were one of the highest traffics on Codex. So it's kind of interesting to have had that.
Like, was that a compliment or were you in trouble?
It was a compliment, but it was more like we had to now switch to 3.5, which was actually going to have a cost. And so that's where we had extra incentive around monetizing. So that was just an interesting piece. We then applied to the Neo Accelerator and got in. We were in their second cohort. Honestly, for us, it was super helpful and beneficial because, to be honest, all three founders, we went to University of Rochester. Rochester isn't the most I'd say entrepreneurial community. There's a lot of interesting people there, but you're not necessarily exposed to the right knowledge, I'd say, to learn how to really take a startup and scale it. But that said, post Accelerator, we moved to New York City, continued, building up Quizard. We then launched our second product, which was Unstuck AI at the end of August in 2024, kind of taking all the playbooks for growth and product development that we learned through Quizard. This is our fastest growing product yet. We hit 1 million users in under 9 weeks, and then just started scaling it from there. And so now across the portfolio, we do 5 million users. We hit $6 million in ARR, and we've been profitable since the first 9 months of operating. The profitability actually came pretty early. And so after Neo, we only raised a smaller angel round. We raised from people like Cal Henderson, the co-founder of Slack, Maria Zhang, the ex-CTO of Tinder, and Russell Kaplan, who's the current president of Cognition Labs.
Yep, I met him.
And nice, sweet. Yeah, I guess at that point, we sort of realized that a lot of the play, in some sense, we were kind of going hard mode by going directly to consumer ed tech, selling to a generally broke, demographic, with more finicky spending and such. And we realized that a lot of our playbooks for growing and distributing and building product and scaling product were very market agnostic. In fact, we started placing bets earlier that year about which markets are ripe for popping off. And then we'd suddenly see people launch apps in that domain that were quite simple, technically and just purely running on the same playbooks we'd had. And we realized that, hey, we could probably do the same thing if we took even maybe 50% of the amount of work we do in terms of winning in this market. We could probably do really well in other markets. And that was the idea that Oleve was born of. We're taking all the playbooks that we've learned over the last 2 years and in building and scaling both Quizard and Unstuck successfully and applying it to different verticals, be lifestyle, wellness, fitness. We have a third product that's kind of in stealth right now. And so can't necessarily talk about it, but it's our first one outside of ed tech. We're super excited by it. That's kind of why we felt that this model could work. It also meant a bit of a reorganization, how the company approaches, I guess, scaling, both as a company, but also our portfolio. And so this is how we've kind of now structured the company under the like product engineering org and platform org, where the product engineers are people who individually will own like an app or two, like depending on like bandwidth that they can manage. And the platform team is actually, as you see on the website, the software engineering team is quite detached from an individual product, and it's more focused on building like systems to scale across products. So you can think of it as like the universal architectures and components and libraries we use across our products, the way we do our AI, the way we like monitor all our referral mechanisms, or all our like notification mechanisms. The platform team also owns a lot of the like significantly technical like engineering like systems. The idea is that the product engineers are like direct revenue lines into business, and they need to be solely focused on like effectively CEOing that project. And so they need to be focused on user experience. They're living in the metrics. They're focused on like revenue, profitability, reducing churn, retention, and all this sort of stuff. And this detached team can focus on like reusing like concepts across different products to make things more deterministically like successful, if that makes sense. The third piece of the platform is kind of interesting. I think you might like to hear about it. Is effectively what I'm trying to do with the platform is start up an internal shadow org within the company that's all run by agents, effectively staffing like each business unit with agents. Our growth and marketing, especially being the highest priority, but also like our product teams and how we discover new products and new spaces to double down in. Because the idea eventually is to have Oleve be this like company where we hire people for their taste, their strategic thinking, their expertise, but a lot of the operating could be done primarily through agentic workflows or automations that we build in. And so that's kind of the model that we've sort of like landed on right now and we're scaling with. And I think the reason why like growth and distribution matters the most is because our thesis on consumer software now is it's going to reflect less or look less like, or operating consumer technology companies is going to look less like traditional tech companies and more like CPG companies that were like very much distribution first, always branding like at the forefront, because people who now have a more refined taste on how they purchase consumer software, they've spent enough time paying for things online that they now like have a taste of when they want to buy things or when they want to continue subscribing to things. And so people have a more refined sense of like taste in general. And so actually we are quite excited by the fact that it's a much more competitive market, because it means that we can have like a lot more wins if we double down on our distribution tech or distribution, like, I guess, like playbooks, so to say.
Yeah, you don't have a common brand. Like the people who use Unstuck don't necessarily know about Quizard, correct? Or they
No,
don't
we've
know at
tried.
all. They don't even know it's
They
the
don't
same.
really know. Yeah, not really. Some may, but generally we've not like cross-sold between those two products. And effectively, they serve two different like user persona, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. I guess on the App Store, if you do a little bit of like, oh, who made this? And then you can actually see on the App Store that it's the same
Oh,
people.
100%. Yep. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. But like,
We
okay,
will.
in education, like, I actually haven't looked at the App Store things. 100. You're really good in ed tech. I almost feel
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
okay, so you gave me a whole bunch of things. Sorry, I didn't want to
Yep.
cut you. Was there any other
No,
things that
you're
you
good.
Okay.
No,
So
no,
I'm
this
go
is good.
through, yeah, I'll go through historically. Like, I just want to double click on like each of those things, right? And, probably there'll be all the time that we have. Um,
Totally.
Quizlet was Quizlet your first ever app? Did you have previous successes before Quizlet? Like, how did you just
No.
go from 0 to 100 like this?
Yeah. Quizlet was honestly like, Quizlet was the first app that we built and put out. A lot of it came from like kind of first mover's advantage, if I'm being honest. Like we were the first of the kind on the market where you could just, take a picture of any sort of um, like problem you're stuck on, question you're working with, concept you're working through, and sort of get like this sort of like in-depth tutoring experience around it. The user experience was somewhat proved already though. Like if you look at companies like Photomath and Socratic, both bought by Google, they like had a similar idea of like a scan and solve approach where, you take a picture of something that you need help with, and we give you support around that very specific like ask that you have.
But Codex did not have this. So are you saying this is functionality that happened after Codex, right?
Well, Codex had the ability. You mean in terms of like
The photo.
the like image? Well, yeah, the first version of the app, we would basically like just like OCR the image and then pass that OCR into a fine-tuned model that would be able to like extract like specific features from it that helped us better like answer those questions. So things like what subject it is, or like maybe like what subtopic within the subject it is, because if we know those details, then we can best like we can probably respond to it in a more better way. So for example, if you're asking a math question, specifically like something like arithmetic, it's probably best to go like step by step than like if you're asking a history question where like going step by step on like who was the first president of, the US isn't like, uh, a step by step sort of response, if that makes sense. So really focus on like, how do we understand what kind of question this person is asking and how do we like deliver the best user experience to help them like understand what they like need and help them get unblocked.
Do you try to do model routing or do you not bother?
Like in terms of like,
Like, oh,
I guess we like,
let me redirect to my math fine tune or, that kind of stuff.
yeah, we've thought about that. I think like we spent a lot of time thinking about like this being like a top way to go forward, i.e. like routing to different models.
A lot of people do this. Yeah.
For us, we've actually like figured that the return on it was not actually that beneficial. What makes sense for us instead is, like we use base models, for like the final like response. What makes more sense for us is, can we like spend more time on that fine tuned, like a feature extractor up front and then like build in these like, and instead of model routing, it's more like prompt routing, if that makes sense. So we like route to the right prompts, the right tools, the right examples based on the exact level of granularity we know on what kind of question is coming in. And this scales in terms of like, whenever you switch the base model gets better, like this builds on top of that. So you're not always competing or in any way to keep up with like the best of the best in some sense. Cause like, for example, OpenAI has probably a dedicated team to do math. You know what I mean? Like we're like very lean. So for us, we have to think about what is the best way to build on top of them so that as they continue to improve that stuff, we are actually benefiting more from it. And for us, that was more so this quote unquote prompt routing. If that makes sense.
I mean, I think OpenAI is not that interested in like high school math. They're more like, trying to
That's
do
fair.
and frontier math type things.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so and then on the distribution side, mostly TikTok.
Yeah, TikTok and Instagram mostly is our bread and butter.
And you guys did it first, and then after that, you sort of worked with influencers to do all this stuff. Is that the general formula?
Yeah, we've done exactly. I guess like a lot of like whenever we launch a product, we do it in house a lot, and we've done a few campaigns that have done really well. So for example, like obviously there was the first video with Quizard that like went super viral when we launched the app. The second one that was super interesting is we ran a campaign in the fall. This is one of the videos that we've run. I would say go to the Quizard account as well on TikTok because we've like cross posted from different things. Yeah.
Ooh, 28 million.
Yeah, I have to talk more about that. So basically, like some of our biggest hits have been like in the fall of 2023. If you search TikTok for like, if you search Harvard, NYU, Boston, Columbia on TikTok, we were the first 3 videos, if not all first 5 videos on TikTok. And it's because we were running a man on the street campaign that went super viral. If you look at the 11.7 million view, that's from that era where you just went around like asking the most like hot take, like sort of like hot takes for college campus. This wasn't necessarily like something that converted to like, product, like conversions, but this was more brand building, that effectively allowed us to like build a significant audience. People would then click into it, figure out where you're from, figure out the app, and they go and try it out. But this is one of our like most viral like campaigns. The second thing we did was
copycats of this one.
Yeah. People started copying right after. We had like bigger companies in ed tech as well as like small companies try it. But at that point, we'd sort of like milked out the alpha in this concept, if that makes sense. So it didn't. The second concept that went super well was when we launched Unstuck. I actually borrowed this concept from. Have you heard of dupe.com?
No. Dupe?
Okay.
Looking for similar products, right?
Furniture. Yeah. Similar products. Yeah. So basically, when they launched, they had one concept with this like sticky note thing, where like they would basically like if you go back to our like TikTok, I could show you the like basically all the sticky note concepts are from that. This is how we launched Unstuck. We were able to get 250 million views in under a month just on this concept, just ripping this concept over and over again. And this is what sort of like scaled Unstuck's like initial like viral growth. Yeah.
But like the sticky note is actually that important because I guess it makes a good.
100%. It's like the like there's different features of this, right? There's Mr. Beast video in the background. I don't know if this is Mr. Beast. Sometimes it's Subway Surfer. There's the fact that the angle in that video is like basically pointing at that professor's ass in a very funny way. Like, and it's like the handwriting has to be super clear. So there's a lot of detail and experimentation that's gone into a lot of our videos. we've also had like one video do so well. We're working with some events so well that it brought our app all the way to number 4 in the education charts. And so it was like, you know, Photomath owned by Google, bought for half of, I think like, I don't really know how much, but like a sizable amount of money. Like I'd assume like a fair amount. Um, Duolingo. I think there was like this giant app studio doing this plan scanner app that was in the education category. And then there was us, like 4 people, like Quizard, in the number 4 category. This was back when we launched another campaign. Yeah.
Photomath is still up there. Wow.
Yeah. Photomath is definitely up there.
What is
It's one in,
yeah.
I was going to say about Photomath, one in every like 4 high school students, has used Photomath or has Photomath on them. They've got a pretty large now. They've existed for like 8 years or 9 years now.
Would you say, let's say Goth or like Solvex, these are your competition?
I would say they're definitely like competing with us in that like, Quizard space specifically.
Yeah. Okay. Like, do you know them? Is it like a small community of like everyone knows everyone, or is it just the Wild West?
No, everyone kind of knows everyone. For example, like Goth, but Goth is like a special case. Like it's owned by TikTok,
Okay.
so they have like in some sense infinite distribution
Oh my
in
God.
many ways.
Connor's gonna freak out about this.
Yeah, actually, when TikTok went down, Goth went down too because it was one of their ads. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Then there's Question AI. So Question AI is interesting. They're actually like the US brand, US a US version of or let's say the US product from a like Chinese like company called Zoibank out in China. And so they came to the US market to compete on the same thing, but they do like a few hundred million, I think, like already back in China on their like products. But this is their jump into the market. So we're definitely competing with some like a few players, but we've been able to kind of win on the fact that whenever we go to market with like concept and distribution, it's stuff that really hits with or resonates with our persona, like user persona really well.
Yeah. I mean, then the question comes to like, how do you retain these users, right? Because how are you going to stop them jumping from app to app to app, right? Like there's going to be one after this, one after this. Like, so what's the, this very VC question, what's the moat, right? Like, how do
Yeah.
how do you make them loyal, sticky, whatever?
Yeah, totally. I think like the truth is like if you think about like how students use different products, like a lot of them will like hit a paywall on one and move to another. You know what I mean? Like a lot of them are like it's already a very specific case. So if your question is how do you retain users, you already have a natural churn every 4 years a student graduates, and like that's already like something you're dealing with, and you're always dealing with a new cohort. So I think like moat in this sense is more so thinking about like how do we continue being at the forefront of distribution so that people are consistently thinking about it as top of mind. It's kind of like
you can't always be on top of TikTok. You know what I mean? Like
exactly. But you mean like because we can't be on top of TikTok, what do we do on that?
I mean, you
basis?
can. It's just going to be very hits driven. It's going to be unpredictable. It's going to be, and then sometimes you're going to not do well, like just because, right?
Yeah, I think that's where we feel that we're bringing going viral down to more of a science to the point that we actually are trying to make it a little more deterministic on our end. But I will say a lot of it has come from like friends refer each other. They love the product. We keep it very simple. We keep it very clean. And I think people sort of like I think if you think of consumer products more as like CPG products where it's associated to like some sort of brand or aesthetic or like aligning with some community, then the way you go to market and the way you sort of like, the sort of influencers you work with or the sort of like, UGC content you might put out there, users will align more with that. And, it just keeps us top of mind when they use our product, i.e. like the question would be like, I guess like a counter question would be like, why do people like buy like Coca-Cola instead of like Pepsi? It's probably because like people associate that brand as just being like much more like, I don't know, just like higher value than Pepsi.
Yeah.
And I think we're playing on that. We're pushing on that realm a little bit where like, sure, we've got all these subscription stuff. We're building a product that's really good. We like try to like provide the best value for students and we try to like make sure things are like high value. But at the end of the day, like this branding piece is probably one of the most important thing, especially in consumer tech right now, i.e. being in the forefront of people's minds, being like on top of their feeds and being like, and having a brand voice that resonates the most with like their like, I guess, day to day in their lifestyle. So it feels like we're like selling to them and they're like really like part of this community or part of this like, I guess aesthetic that we're pitching them with our brand.
I guess the standard, what I'm more looking for as well is like there's network effects and then there's personalization. So the more they use you, the better you get, and the more people use you, the
Yeah.
better it gets, right?
Yeah.
So like you haven't really tapped those it's not low hanging fruit. It's like that's the platform.
Yeah.
We can talk about the platform. So okay,
Yeah.
I'm
Literally,
interested.
that's the platform. Yeah.
So you're starting this platform team, or you already have
Yeah.
started?
We've already started it. And basically the goal of the platform is to be that moat, right? Where we build a lot of these systems that allow us to sort of scale individual like brands from 0 to 1 million as deterministically as possible. And then build a lot of the tooling around things that will let us like deterministically go viral on social media, or with other content, and like basically be this like almost this like abstraction layer across different business units in the company where we just are building things to scale like their workflows and their playbooks. Because all the playbooks that we run are very like, I guess like automatable at this point. And so a lot of what people on the platform team do is like look at processes that we run in the company and then think about how can we like build tooling around this to make the decisions better or scale with like automation, i.e. like agents or stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And I'm just kind of curious what you have found so far that is important for an AI engineering platform. So I see some details of the stack, which is Python, Fast API, Flask, Mongo, and Postgres. I guess you use one, but then you're saying you're open to others, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Docker, Kubernetes, and Terraform. Anything else? Like any of the vector databases that you like? Any of the API AI gateways that you like? Just literally anything. Any framework, LangChain? No.
Yeah, no, I can talk to some of the weird like other hacks that we've done in the
Sure.
past, to be honest, to like that have let us like I guess like scaled a bit leanly. But in terms of like AI tooling, we've done a lot of things like natively. I use native SDKs. I think like we've been because it's so critical to know what goes into your prompt. I think it's been very important for us to like sort of like manually like own those prompts, i.e. like build the integrations ourselves and build those like workflows ourselves. So we haven't really like used a lot of like other like frameworks outside of that. What I will say, like in terms of vector database stuff, I think a lot of like our decisions comes down to the fact that we're operating very lean, and so we know that like we can't have an engineer like fully own something, and so it's like we try to outsource like stress, let's say, as much as possible. So actually, the vector DB that we or vector search service that we work with is Azure AI Search. One, because we got a shit ton of credits from Azure, like about like 2K in credits, but on top of that, it's also because they have a lot of things handled under the hood through this like very seamless wrapper. This scaling is a little funky on that, but we built like solutions around it to sort of like keep like costs at bay. I.e. like the interesting thing with Azure AI Search is when you hit a certain tier's limit, you have to like migrate everything. You have to purchase a new tier and then migrate everything to that new tier, which is a little like, yeah, I know it's not like great. It's like really ass. But what we've built in on our end is like, okay, something with consumer AI products is everyone does a novelty test, right? If you hear about a new product, you're going to try something that you wouldn't have used on the daily at all. But like for it to be a winning product, we have to win on the novelty as well as the actual use case. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Um, and so what happens is like you hear about Unstuck, you're going to put this like random video that you don't give a shit about, but like you're never actually going to use again, but you want to test the, test the limits a little bit. And we have to work for that. The problem is, that is going to sit in our index, and it's going to take space. And obviously the way this pricing model of Azure AI Search works is it's storage based. So what we do have is we actually have a de-indexer that runs like, every like few days where basically we look at the index, we look at what's like being put in there and what hasn't been used in a while, and we take it off. And the moment somebody like tries to trigger it again, we immediately reload it back in there. And this has helped us like keep from needing to like scale in a crazy way because we basically erase all the novelty test like files off of the index and only keep the things that people are like frequently using, which grows at a much more like
Yeah, yeah.
manageable rate.
You take it off the index, but you don't delete the data.
We
You
don't
just
delete the data.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
We only
yeah.
charge for what's loaded in the index. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's kind of a cool trick. So you're just like things that people use once and never use again. Yeah, I mean that's
Yeah.
any
Exactly.
right. This is not a use
Yeah.
specific situation. This is like a trick that anyone
Exactly.
could do.
Exactly. Another thing that's more interesting though is like we actually like, I wouldn't say the word abuse, but we don't use launch darkly like exactly as it should be. So the story, let me start with a little bit of the story. So initially we had got these like Azure like credits, about 300, 400K in them. And basically, we wanted to move all our OpenAI load to Azure OpenAI, but this was, about a year ago. And back then the limits were super strict, i.e. we weren't going to be able to like run our volume on Azure AI, especially when back to school was about to hit. And so, I've been on months trying to get back to them, like trying to have them push the limits up for one region. And then they came back to us and said, hey, it's really hard to get a region level increase, but you can stand up like an Azure AI endpoint across multiple regions instead of a load balancer, and to like load balance across them. And for me, I'm like, dude, like I'm like one engineer on the back end. I am not managing a load balancer on top of like all the other things I have to do. And so I was trying to figure out like a good way around this. And then I realized that one night when I was setting up a launch hierarchy, like staged a rollout, that effectively the staged rollout flag is kind of like a router at the end of the day. And so what we do is we use the we use launch hierarchy flags to route between different Azure OpenAI endpoints, setting up the percentages ourselves. And so now like every new request is a random, like a new like user effectively. And so it comes in, it like hits like, the launch hierarchy flag, and it gets routed to one of the Azure endpoints. And so that scales because obviously launch hierarchy scales really well. And this is their main like thing. And so we've done shit like that where like, now we do a lot of our load balancing off of launch hierarchy, where we can now manage it on one place, i.e. we can redirect traffic across products to different models and try things out. But a lot of the management can happen without needing to redeploy, which has been super interesting for us and helped us scale really well. Yeah.
Fascinating. I mean, like, do you even like? I'm sure like most of your users are US, or it actually does it matter region wise?
We have like international users, but most of our paying users are from the US.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, we have a ton of international though.
Yeah, I guess international is good for keeping you up in a free tier, and then the paying converts. Sorry, I have this tendency to go into business side, but I want to stay on the tech side, especially. I mean, you're a CTO, so you can answer all the tech things. Prompts engineering. Usually, like, I have been going back and forth on, do I store prompts in my code base? Right. And developers love storing prompts in their code base. They're like, we can version control it. We can see it together with all the other stuff. And then you're like, yeah, but iteration is very slow. You have to wait for the full CI/CD process to happen. And you're definitely like, basically, what is your prompt iteration process? Do you use some kind of eval framework or ops thing just for?
No, that makes sense. I think like, we initially when Quizard was like kicking off, like I had to build an eval framework internally because there was not much out on the internet like back then about evals and stuff. We called it Excel. I don't remember what it stood for, but it was something about like, experimental something. It was some acronym. I'll see if I could figure it out. But basically built this benchmark out to run a lot of this like prompt tuning, for different things, specifically like, tuning like that end result when we find a different subject, if that makes sense. Because the way we have Quizlet set up is effectively this decision tree where we fine tune this model to parse out these like specific features. And based on that, we send it down the right like prompt route, if that makes sense, to have it give them the best user experience and the most like high performance answer, if that makes sense. And so like in terms of prompt management, like for us, I think like the way we optimize is more on, and maybe it's not like typical to other tech companies, but for us, like the experiments we've run in the past is like, instead of trying to like do a lot of optimization in advance, it's kind of like we'll run an experiment or we run different prompts and we see which one like triggers conversion better and like improves profitability. And then the one that does, we'll just kind of keep that. But I think there's never like necessarily like a pushing need to continuously tune prompts, if that makes sense. Especially as models get better, like you don't necessarily have to like keep tuning prompts. I think like the better focus is like, if you can figure out, like, I think the priority for people should be more on the orchestration of the AI workflow than the like actual prompts, because LM models are going to get better at like understanding the shittiest prompts, to be honest, and like still deliver value. But the best question is like, how do you make sure you're building as much determinism into a non-deterministic system? And this means like, how do you like limit? It's almost like I sometimes like to liken like prompt engineering as like programming language design, where you're like deciding where the typing is, like where the constraints are, and then how expressive it is, so that you can like both constrain what it can do, but you're allowing to be expressive in a very constrained way. So for example, like on Unstuck, like the agent that runs like the like back and forth chat around our different files, instead of having an agent that's exposed to very axiomatic tools like a search tool, a summarize tool, and some like stuff like that, we instead, what we did is, actually it was very interesting. The way we launched it was just a pure vector search, and we gave it to a beta audience. It was like, do whatever you want, and this is just vector search. And then I would look at the data and I'd be like, oh, these are all the things they were trying to do. I would categorize them and I'd be like, all right, great. We've now identified intents. And so for each intent, we built a deterministic, like LLM driven, of course, workflow. But it's every time that intent is hit, we know it runs the exact same process each time. That also gives us the ability to tune that intent really well, or like know how to fix like a broken user experience. Because if it was something that it was an agent that had exposure to very like basic tools and had to like stitch things together on its own, how the hell are you going to debug that at scale? Like that's so hard. You just kind of made the problem way harder for yourself. And so instead what we have is like literally all the LLM does is it classifies what is the intent of the user, and it has some level of freedom in like specifying parameters to pass in to customize that intent workflow. But at the end of the day, that intent workflow is already predetermined and deterministic in how it will execute. Because the idea is we want to make sure that every user experience, whenever you hit like summarize some content on Unstuck, it's always giving a very similar expected behavior, which is what like users want. Like you don't want magic one moment and no magic the other again, especially like I show a product to my friend and I was like, oh my God, that was so amazing. And then when I show them the same thing, it doesn't work out. Like that would be like not a great user experience, to be honest. And so, I think like less on prompt engineering and prompt versioning, but more on like how, like, because this will matter less and less, I think, to be honest. And what will matter more is like, have you built a system that will like allow you to scale deterministically and like actually manage improving your like workflows deterministically? So I guess what I mean by that is I would emphasize people to focus on like building the most if else condition-esque like LLM flows, because that gives you something to actually improve. I.e., like if I identify an intent that's doing really shittily, but has high volume usage, I know the expected value of improving that intent. And so I know how to prioritize my engineers on that, like, improving the product in that way. But if you have something that's like, if you're just prompt tuning and you don't really know why you're, tuning it or what the like general like benchmark you're trying to improve with is, like you're kind of wasting like, I guess like time and energy in a like unknown like direction or north star. I don't know if any of this like sort of answers your question, but we've kind of moved away from the whole framework of prompt tuning and more on like making sure the workflow is something that can be managed at scale in terms of improving it.
No, it's really good. I mean, in a way, it's kind of like you have a kind of router. You're really the classification step is still important, right? And that's what a
Yeah,
router would do.
exactly.
Except that the classification doesn't lead you to route to a different model. It just leads you to route to a different workflow that is more deterministic, as you say. I would use
Yeah,
reliable rather than deterministic because it's still not
yeah.
deterministic entirely.
Valid. No, valid.
Yeah. And then I guess like people can report hallucinations and bugs and you can see if there's an S
Yeah,
spike, you can go solve
exactly.
that.
In a specific intent and double down that intent and fix it.
Yeah. Actually kind of curious. Have you seen interesting holes in knowledge between OpenAI versus Claude versus anyone else of like, oh, this is like
Ooh.
really bad at history and like, oh, it's really good at since this other thing.
I think like as opposed to like knowledge gaps in subjects, what we have found differences in is, and maybe this is kind of like well known, but whenever we need to do stuff that's a little more conversational or like a little more like a little better at slang, like Claude is way better at slang. Like whenever you ask like Claude to generate something that's like that sounds like human or like sounds like it fits in with like the tone of whatever like
Like
you're like giving it to
Gen
like
Z.
regenerate. Yeah, it's way better at being Gen Z versus OpenAI would just throw in hashtags and emojis. And I'm like, dude, like this sounds so fake. But yeah, Claude is whenever we've had to do something like run a workflow, whether for growth stuff or like in a product where we needed to sound more human and scale like human like tech, like human sounding text, Claude has been the model of choice.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, that's a win for Claude. I was gonna say when you started talking about conversation, I was like already, Claude has that reputation, but I didn't know
Yeah.
about writing style and like, yeah, definitely OpenAI is very cringe. And any other models that stand out, or are you just the big two labs?
I think these two are our main right now, to be honest. We are exploring Gemini as well for some of our stuff,
I mean,
but
Gemini is
haven't.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we like, I think I don't have enough reps in with Gemini to have like about like a good take on it, but so far it's just been OpenAI and Claude.
Yeah. I mean, what it comes down to is that you are necessarily the multi-model now, and you cannot just be Azure OpenAI credits, right? Like you
Yeah,
have
yeah, exactly.
some kind of model, like AI gateway or whatever
Yeah.
that normalizes these things. Yeah, cool. Okay. Any other hard AI engineering problems that you want to talk about? Like, things that just you took a while to figure out.
Let me think about this. I think, yeah, I don't know if I have anything come to mind because most of it has been less on like the AI engineering like task itself and more on like you like how to support a certain user experience, you know, and like we've done little like a few hacks around like different things like that. And like I think like the way we build and the way we prioritize things is how can we make sure everything is experimental like by nature. So like, you know, we launch like when we have our transcription service, we have like a waterfall, you know, approach, and we have things that we can dine out. And this also is matched by Launch Darkly. So like if you know if one service goes down, we can reorder it in Launch Darkly and send it, and suddenly it will like prioritize a different like waterfall structure. And so like honestly, if Launch Darkly goes down, we're cooked. Like we're literally like operating a lot of the company off of Launch Darkly. So definitely a big fan of their product.
I mean, you should send them this recording once we're done, because like I feel like it's a big investment. But also maybe you're they'll be like, what are you doing with us? Have you explored other alternatives to Launch Darkly, or are you just a Launch Darkly maxi? You know, because I've heard that they're expensive, but maybe like you're so profitable you don't care. I don't know.
We actually are not. We're still in their developer account. We don't use. Yeah, yeah. Like I think like the way we like run experiments is we don't use them for experiments. We just use them purely as feature flags. And when we obviously abuse the feature flags in a way that's like interesting, but they don't price on that, like the way we use it, right? They don't price on how many people are hitting your feature flag. And that works for us. The way we run experiments though, pardon?
I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Sorry, yeah. But the way we run experiments is, oh, sorry, to answer your initial question, we have tried things like StatSig, and stuff like that, but I think like it didn't seem to provide the value that we were looking for. The other analytics software we use is Mixpanel. And then the last thing that we do is for experiments, especially for, you know, the mobile app experiments. Okay, so like have you heard of RevenueCat? So RevenueCat in the paywall has this metadata like tag thing, which is actually meant for like you to like render your paywall in a very specific way, not so much anything else. But we actually use that to run our experiments as well, i.e. like when you send a paywall, you can send a metadata flag, but we send an experiment value that we attach to the user, and that will trigger like obviously some experiment function. So for example, whether features enabled or not. And then when they hit the paywall, obviously like we know that this user conditioned by this experiment is now seeing this paywall. So we actually do a lot of our experiments off of RevenueCat, but we've kind of like, I wouldn't say misuse, but like use in a different way, like this metadata tag that you can send to like customize a paywall on our end. So it's been like very like, what is the best way to consolidate like all the things we need on the platforms you already use? And we've just been, I think we've been very like thankfully very scrappy about like finding ways to solve certain problems. And they've actually scaled pretty well for us. And so yeah, I actually like we don't really pay, we don't like have a huge cost on Launch Darkly. Like to your initial point, it's been pretty good.
That's
But yeah.
awesome. That's awesome. Okay, cool. All right, now I'll close it out with the last thing that you mentioned, which is you're also looking to have purely AI automated agents running around in your company. Plus, I think a lot of people are saying that they do that, and then I'm like suspicious of like how much they're actually doing. Like Klarna is doing that. It sounds like Shopify is about to do more of that. Like, what are the opportunities that you see for building those things?
Yeah, I think a lot of the options we've seen and we have already deployed in some of these, like, is I guess to caveat, like the first thing we always do is like try to see if we can build like regular automation, see if that scales, and then build the agent that like supports everything. What I mean by that is like, um, we don't want to overinvest in trying to get an agent stood up if we can solve the problem with like general, like basic automation or like get better
Zapier.
dashboard and tooling. Yeah, exactly. Things like that. But what we've seen opportunities for are like, sorry, go on.
Oh, no, no, there's like the AI native versions of Zapier. So like Lindy,
Yeah. Yeah.
and Gumloop and
Yep.
Wordware, those kinds of guys. Yeah.
100%. I think for us, like what we see opportunities are like for it is mostly on this like growth, our growth and marketing side, i.e. like things like how we do research, like how we study concepts in the market, like ways to like have agents to run to like understand what concepts are winning and going really viral across markets or market segments that are very similar to the market that we're going to launch an app within. And so basically like right now we literally pay like we literally have our like head of marketing who literally like is literally 25 hours a day on TikTok, you know, scrolling like literally like an ungodly amount. But it's because like he's like sort of like tuned into the algorithm itself. And honestly, like if you could free his time by building agents to help him do all like replace a lot of his workflows, like that would be a level up for us. So
What?
honestly, on our end, it's like, pardon?
Like what?
Literally watch TikTok with me, you know, because like you can learn a lot by like curating your like feeds to like hit a certain demographic, you know, and you can see the sort of content you get like shown. So a lot of the opportunities we see is in like basically like reproducing like the workflows that our marketing team like already does internally.
Hmm.
And so like it's very much like, let me just see what this dude does. Let me just reproduce as an agent and let me give him like a synthesis at the end of that workflow so that he can work with it for the next stage of like what happens after researching a concept. So a lot of it is still like, I will like, I will say a lot of it is still very nascent. So we haven't like, we're still in this phase of like trying to figure out what works and what doesn't and then scaling that. But we see a lot more opportunities in terms of like research for marketing concepts in terms of social media, as well as like research in terms of identifying like, what's the next product market to hit, if that makes sense. So for example, like the way my co-founder will like, and us will like the way we'd all like research a new market, a lot of that is very like systematic, but a lot of it then sometimes has some gut checks. And if you could like get that systematic way, like part of it, like out of the way through like agents or like just like a really powerful analytics dashboard, then we can sort of like scale how fast we make these decisions on like what's the next product line that makes sense, that's highly lucrative and guaranteed to be like a profitable like venture to like spend time in.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, I think that's something that everybody would want. There's something that we figure out how to do. In my company, we're starting to talk about a sales agent that like reads our emails and then responds with like, information or requests or like invoice details and all that stuff.
That's
I don't know if it's over engineering. I'm just like, I don't know. Sometimes it'll be better if a human does it, but because you want to automate, then you have to code this agent up and it's probably going to suck. It's probably going
yeah.
to have mistakes. I don't know if it's worth it,
No, no, 100%. I think that's why it's like, if you can like, if you can first build like an automation tool that scales a human to do it really well or do it faster, then you can like determine if you still need it to like build the agent to run on its own independently. So we're not necessarily like gung ho, like, yeah, let me put an agent to everything. It's more so the first phase is to like, can we like build the right automation tooling to make a human be more augmented in doing their work? And then we can sort of like build an agent if there's more like need, or we need to scale that workflow like in parallel, like across like different yeah, just we need to scale up to run many things in parallel, if that makes sense.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. Taking went over as it is, but it was a really interesting chat. Any calls to action? I guess it's just hiring.
Yeah, mostly we're hiring. I believe we're building a systematic consumer portfolio firm. And we're building the system to help, launch and win deterministically in any market. And we're coming for every market. So if you're interested in working on and owning consumer products that go from 0 to 1 million, or interested in building a company that's run purely by agents, would love to chat. Please reach out. Of
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for joining. I'm sure this won't be the last time we chat.
course, yeah. Thank you for having me.